All right, we're back. We're up to group policies and finalizing the lab. So this is Alex's introduction to Windows 2012, installing and configuring Windows Server. We're still doing the second section of the basic lab setup. We're on we're not on that part. We're on part 6, group policies and finishing the basic lab. And yay, you've been here for a few hours now, and we only have a basic setup going. So this is about what people generally did around Windows 2003 and doesn't really have any wonderful new features yet unless you deployed the VPN or direct access, which would get you to a few years ago to something that's pretty cool. All right, I've done a few things because I realized that I had some mistakes. So, for example, I named these machines HA15 instead of HV15. And as I recall, the servers weren't named properly, so I went in and renamed them. So if we're going to do our cleanup in general of stuff, then we need to go over to our client that has ADUC or ADAC. So Active Directory users and computers, or Active Directory whatever this is. And if I hit refresh here, then you see these are named HV14, HV15 instead of administrator or whatever it was. And FS1 still not correctly named. And I've actually gone on to these and run the VMware tools. It's not necessary. However, if you're going to run your servers or run older version of Windows, you'll want to run the Microsoft version of the integration services. And we'll cover that in the Hyper-V version of this. So right now I'm just installing VMware tools, changing the IP address from DHCP, and changing the name of this machine to FS13. It's a pretty stupid naming convention. However, we don't have to do things like site, machine type, processor type in the name here. So it's not necessarily such a bad thing. And you may recall my saying that group policies were a really useful thing, and we were going to need them for doing sus properly. So actually, I'm going to cancel this new GPO creation and basically go, if there is an organizational unit, you can assign a group policy. Now, there are a lot of differing views on group policy and domain design and structure and delegation. I don't particularly like a large structure, and Microsoft basically says you probably want to have 2 OUs wide or 3 OUs wide at the top for your stuff, which would be sort of like computer accounts, server accounts would go under one. Domain controllers are going to go under their own thing because they have their own default domain controller policy. And if you click on the settings, you can see the stuff that's in it. And things like who's allowed to change the time, create a page file, can you short the system down remotely, can you do a batch job. So there's some things in here that matter, And you might add service accounts to do batch jobs or something like that, and that's going to be a more advanced feature than in the introduction. But in the servers, you can see there's no group policies. And at the root, you can see there's no group policy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group policy in this domain called lab required so you can do things like block inheritance, which would not allow policies like the default domain policy to go through. And a lot of people block inheritance and don't enforce the default domain policy. Microsoft's got those policies that way for a reason. They recommend not changing them. I recommend not changing them. If you change them, it's fundamentally recommended that you change them in a separate policy. And I'm going to edit this policy that I just created. And under computer configuration, Windows settings, there are things like scripts the computer should run on startup or shutdown, name resolution policy. Are you going to use DNSSEC in here? Security settings, there's account policies, which are password policy on the local machines. Local policies, which come in all fun things. So there's the audit policy here. This isn't going to be defined here because there's another audit policy setting. That's an older version of the audit policy. User rights assignments, access the computer from the network. Can anyone do that? So these things get modified if you use the Microsoft tools to add people. So the default on this is administrators, backup operators, users, and everyone. And you probably don't want all the users attaching to all of the other workstations. But on servers, you pretty much want that. Change the system time. You don't want anyone to do, and it's just administrators and local service for workstations and servers, and on domain controllers, the server operator can do it. And that's might be something that matters if you get your system out of sync. Kerberos doesn't work properly. You can change the values on it. Generally, 5 minutes is not an understandard thing. Change the time zone. So this isn't defined here. And I'm going to, that's not change the time zone. That's change who can change the time zone. So there's a bunch of things in here that are obvious. You don't want people modifying objects in the system. You don't want anyone shutting it down. Security options, you're going to have to know a bunch of. Open up. And these are the audit policies that kind of matter. And you can say, do you sign communication always? That's going to be some sort of NTLM communication. It will stop casual people. Might not stop everyone these days. There's ways around this. Event log. How big is the size going to be? What's the retention method? Do I want to retain it every couple of days? Overwrite events, overwrite analysis, don't overwrite events. There's a archive setting somewhere in here. I don't remember where it is. Restricted groups would be if I wanted to add a group to the machine to do something. Add group. What group do I want to add? Nah, not going to put it on there. System services, how do you want them to start up? Registry, do you want to put things in? File system, central access policy. Doesn't look like there is one. That'll get covered later when we go through some more things. Firewall with advanced is explicitly on the list. And you can come in here and open this up and say, I want to see the firewall properties. I could say the domain profile, it's off or on. Or I want to allow certain things, or how do I want to log it on each of these, and what do I do about IPsec traffic? For the inbound rules, you can just say like new rule, predefined, let's say, do I want to allow branch cache, Active Directory through, what are we looking for? Network discovery. I can allow that through. File and printer sharing and SMB direct. I could say, do I want to allow DNS stuff? This largely gets modified on servers when you install the actual applications, because it's easier and Microsoft tries to make it easier in a lot of ways. I could say there's a port I want to let through. What ports? I'm not going to deal with it now. And there are no connection security rules. Software restriction policies you're going to have to know. So this says I don't let this software run. Maybe I don't want iTunes to run if someone's got an old version of it. The boss said put a stop to it. So I get the properties. Software is not going to run regardless. Basic user allows some things to run. Additional rules. That was not the correct policy. And there's also application control policies, which are much better. Oops, let's close that one. Where's application? AppLocker goes under here. AppLocker only works with Windows 7 and up. And there's some options on here you can choose. And you can automatically generate rules. And this is generating publisher rules. I don't know what's on here. I'm creating this. I'm canceling this. I believe there's default rules for create default rules. My bad. And they're maybe not the best rules in the world. And you should definitely test them before you consider using them. You're going to find a lot of people have executables that need to run off the network in some location. And it's likely not the same location for everyone's machine. So that's really going to matter. And so we go down to administrative templates, Windows components, Windows update. This is what we need. I'm going to pull over standard. If you have the extended one on, it shows you, but let's configure automatic updates. Enabled, automatically download and schedule the install. Next setting gets you through and back. So the update location, is going to be http://dhcp12, if I remember right. Yep. DHCP12 port, and we had this thing a minute ago, or I had a thing, where I couldn't find the IIS site, so I'm just going to say port 8530, because I happen to know that that's correct. And I guarantee you, if anyone from Microsoft watches this video, the next time there's an exam change, they're going to put find the IIS controls. So this has got updates. They're scheduled for install. I don't even think I said what the install time was. Detection frequency, you can do 22 hours, you can do 1 hour. I'll leave it at 22 hours. Do you want to allow non-administrators? This is something for workstations. It's something you have to decide as a policy for your company. A lot of people allow non-administrators to get it, and they give them a few hours to get out of their work and run the updates. Software notifications. Do you see detailed users in the notifications about software that Microsoft is featuring? Allow update immediate installation. This is updates that should automatically install and not interrupt Windows services or restart Windows. So I'm going to do recommended updates as well. I'm going to leave this one at default. Yes, I'm going to reprompt for restart with scheduling updates, and I'm going to remind them every 10 minutes. It looks like we're being slow for some reason. This just means that the restart might be delayed a few minutes. This is going to try to run automatic updates when the machines restart. Client-side targeting. This is a pretty good rule. Let's say I have a company. I have different kinds of machines. I might say this group is servers, and the next group is workstations. And on my SUS server, if I've enabled client-side targeting and I have groups that match properly, the machines will check in and they will automatically add themselves to those groups rather than doing it manually. So that's a good feature. Am I going to allow signed updates? Yes. So now we've gone, previous, through a lot of these settings. This one is do not display install updates in the shutdown box. Yeah, I do want to display that, although I don't like it as much. Do you want to adjust the default options and install to shutdown? You can read what that is if you like. Do you want to allow power management to turn things on? Probably, but you're going to have to test it. So that's it. This is a group policy. It's going to apply to every machine, and I believe the settings are, let's disable the user configurations because I've got nothing in there. Links, security, you're going to see that authenticated users can read this policy, which means that they can implement it. And created 12/18/2012 implements WSIS configure and put my Alex McDermott initials. So that's it. That's here. If we go back to this and look at lab internal and the linked group policy objects, you'll see the first thing that goes is the default domain policy. Settings that conflict with subsequent policies like the lab required policies, or in the case of domain controllers, you click on group policy inheritance, you see labs going first, whoa, domain policies going second, and I want to modify that. I want the lab required policies to have a higher order of precedence. So if we go over to here, precedence is lab required policies because we're going to do default domain policies, then lab policies, which might override some of these. And if we go to domain controllers, you've got group policy inheritance, you've got the default domain policy going first, then you've got the lab required policies, which might get overwritten by the default domain controllers policy. And there is a command, not what I wanted. There is a command this is the old way to deal with it. GP results /r all right. So here I am under users administrators. I want to go to the desktop. So this apparently I wanted /h. So this is the output file. And if you look through these settings, these are all the default domain control policy settings. And you see I've got lab required policies as well. So at this point, this machine should actually be either in sus or quickly sussable. So here's the update services. Let's refresh this. And there's one computer. Where is this one computer? Any status? Refresh. dc11.lab.internal. So this is not reported yet, but it has reported that it exists. And over the next period of time, a lot of these will run. Now, the status report's a really useful thing, except for you have to get the Microsoft Report Viewer 2008 redistributable. And that's not installed, and you can get it by following the links. But that's a quick run of group policy and setting group policy to assign WSUS to the servers. And if you go to some of these other servers and look around, I'm not going to reboot this yet, and I'm going to rename this. And also not reboot it. So I want this to be renamed FS13. And I'll get the message about you have to reboot before this takes effect. And I'm going to close this and restart later, because I want to set up NIC teaming. So I mentioned this before, and NIC teaming is sort of like MPIO. I've got two adapters. They're going together. So this is going to create the team, after which we have to configure the IP address on it. And this will eventually clear itself, but we still need to assign an IP address to this machine. Now, if you wanted to, you could avoid this by looking up the MAC address of this machine in ipconfig. And you could create a reservation for this machine. Every time it boots up, it would connect to a server, and that server would give it a reservation. If you have multiple sites with firewall rules between them, and you need to failover replication, the replica server, and you need to bring it up there, you can have an assignment for it there that has the appropriate firewall rules and tunnel rules to get stuff through from one site to the other. 10.0.0.13 255.255.255.0, that's a /24 subnet mask. 10.0.0.1 with a DNS server of 10.0.0.11. Okay. 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 And I believe we can now restart. Not positive I changed the name of this machine, but we're going to restart and call it a hardware reconfiguration. We took two virtual NICs and we put them together. So let's review what we have. If we go back to this wonderful thing, we said we were going to do a couple of things in the lab. So we've got one box. This took a while, and I did this on ESXi. And clearly it's going to have to be doable on Hyper-V. Then we installed the disks to install our thing. Our network, little office, tiny thing. It's so cute. Then we've got an Active Directory server because that lets us keep track of the machines and apply policies to them so they stay updated and they don't get as many viruses, which means that IT gets fewer calls, which means less of a headache for you, unless, of course, management decides to fire everybody. You have DNS because you need it to find things, and Active Directory needs it. It's a requirement. You want dynamically updating DNS, whether it's Active Directory integrated, which gives you a multi-master model, or a bind type master-slave model. We do not have printing. We don't really have file sharing, and we don't have clients. And we certainly don't have Hyper-V. If we go back through the requirements for this, we said that there were 9 areas which were configuring Windows Server. A little bit about Active Directory domain services and objects, domain services administration, networking services, local services, file and print services, group policy, and server virtualization with Hyper-V. So I'm going to probably do Hyper-V next, just because some people will want it to set up the lab themselves. And it gives you the platform to be able to play with all of these items. I've got 2 servers on my machine, HV1 and HV2, and 1 server called FS13. These currently don't have anything on them. Really, everything's running on DC11, DHCP12, and NAT1, which is letting us go back out to the world at large. If you look through the server manager, you can see if you've got all servers installed here. I could say tasks, dashboard, add other servers to manage, find now. Well, I don't have this one, or this one, or this one, but we're going to get them. So you see these things are here, and they're being found slowly. And if you right-click on these, by and large, nothing particularly there. Whereas if you go to DHCP12, you get DHCP Manager, Windows Server Update Services down here. So we haven't added rules or features, but we're going to be adding Hyper-V. We have set up network address translation, Active Directory with Active Directory, DNS, and DHCP. We haven't really done file services, but we have discussed physical drives and the fact that Microsoft's going to the SAN market with storage spaces. We've not discussed print services, but those are pretty easy. If you've set up a printer on your workstation, it's not remarkably different. We got group policy, and we probably don't have other stuff yet, but we'll get to it one of these days. We got the 9 topics. Remember to check with Microsoft to see if it's still current. And at Microsoft's site, there are 20 bullet points for each of these 6 things, or slightly less, being over 100 items that you have to go through all of. Then we talked about the lab setup. We talked about what was required to set it up, and we installed it. We talked about what was going on the network, and we've done sort of everything but the printer and file sharing on this list. And we've got a network scheme, which I think is technically 10.0.0. Let's change that in case we come back to it. And let's verify that just to make sure. Local server 10.0.0. So yeah. We did an introduction to ESXi. We talked about the first servers, although I believe this was Active Directory DNS/WDS, and this one is DHCP WSUS. So Active Directory, Domain Naming System, Windows Deployment Server, DHCP, Dynamic Host Control Protocol Services, and Windows Server Update Services, in addition to network address translation. This really gives us an office from 5 years ago that wasn't run all that well. A lot of offices had more stuff, and we're going to get a few more things that are required and talk about file services and printing, because those are pretty basic features. Come on back if you like it, and we'll see what we can do to help you out if you're interested in this stuff.